Hello everyone. So in my last video, I was promising you that I would explore more about INFJs and neurodivergence by looking in particular at a category of neurodivergent individual that I think maps onto the INFJ personality. Certainly not perfectly. Let's not delude ourselves into thinking there is a perfect one-to-one correspondence between neurodivergence and INFJ. That's not the case, and it shouldn't be the case. However, maybe this category has potential to offer some of you who are asking yourselves these questions some interesting avenues of reflection or research. First of all, let me try to fix getting a bit of, okay. No, that's not necessarily much better, so I'll stay like this. So one reason why it's not easy necessarily to talk about this, well, it's not that it's hard, is that it's a little bit culturally embedded. In the sense that, well, my audience is predominantly non-French speaking, and that's fine. I like that. Makes it broader. We can all connect across the world, in India, in America, in Denmark, in Africa, Australia, everywhere, and it's beautiful. But this category that I'm about to tell you about a little bit is a category of neurodivergence that has not gained currency outside of the French-speaking world, at least not yet. It is very common now. It is really used and tested for in assessments in children and adults who may ask themselves if they might have that particular neurodivergent structure. But this is predominant in France, in Switzerland, particularly the French-speaking part of Switzerland, in Belgium, particularly the French-speaking part of Belgium, in Canada, specifically Quebec. Now, of course, all these regions, and that's a few hundred thousands, 100 millions of people altogether. I mean, they have in common that they are French-speaking predominantly, and so there is a certain French mentality or Francophone mentality, to be more precise, that also is prevalent. And in these countries, including my own country, since I am from France, this category, which is now diagnosed frequently enough, it's assessed and diagnosed, it's called HIP, right? HIP, which is high. It stands for high intellectual potential, right? High intellectual potential. I think it's a bit of a misnomer, and it could have been more fortunate to call it something different, as will appear later in this video. But nevertheless, in French we call it HPI, haut potentiel intellectuel. But the translation, the straight translation into English would be HIP, high intellectual potential. So sometimes people refer to HIP as synonym with having a high IQ, but in fact, what's interesting about HIP and what makes it different is that it's a qualitatively distinct category. Again, we're talking about neurodivergence here. We're not talking about just a high IQ, because as we know, a lot of people whose IQ is high can be perfectly well neurotypical. Some geniuses can be perfectly well neurotypical. We have to stop assuming that when your thinking is a bit different, when your mind is a bit more colorful or imaginative or has strong intuitions, that must mean neurodivergence. It's not the case, okay? And you really have to stop thinking like this if you are tempted to do that, right? And a lot of people who are neurodivergent wishes they weren't, because it can be really disabling to be neurodivergent. So let's not over-idealize and glorify neurodivergence as if that was somehow special, okay? But in the case of HIP people, what are the main traits of HIP people? Well, the traits are high intelligence, that is true. So usually in order to be assessed as HIP and diagnosed as HIP, you do need to score high on an IQ test. I think usually in the vicinity of 130 or more, okay? So that's one condition. Another giveaway is that when you take like a comprehensive IQ test, there's quite a few of those that are used. What's is unique about HIP people is that they tend to have spiked IQs. So often they have like, they score like they get an enormous score on one particular dimension of intelligence. It doesn't have to be verbal. It could also be logical, numerical. It could be pattern recognition, things like that, right? Or working memory. And often there is, symmetrically to this like big spike, there is also an area of vulnerability. So in one of the other areas that are being tested, in fact, the score is quite a bit lower, right? And again, perhaps you'd score low in verbal, or you'd score low in spatial recognition, or you'd score low in logical, numerical, or in memory. There would be a discrepancy somewhere. That is a very, very telling, again, about HIP people. And a couple of other things. These people tend to learn differently from other people. They tend to have unusual patterns of learning, which can also often make it difficult for them to do well at school, where there's patterns of rote learning, where like everything is very codified and regimented. Often these people learn through spikes of energy. They learn a lot through analogy, can't really explain how they got to a particular conclusion. They get to certain conclusions that may be correct, but they don't use the same step-by-step type of approach that is much more common in neurotypical individuals, right? So there's a lot about seeing patterns, recognizing patterns, analogical reasoning, imagistic reasoning, jumping through particular steps or jumping over them, and not often being able to retrace how they got to a particular solution. Okay, so again, you can sense that like there are some areas of overlap with INFJ here for sure. Another trait of HIP individuals is they are often hypersensitive to stimuli and to emotions, which again is by no means always the case with high IQ individuals, as you know. So they're very intellectually profound, emotionally hypersensitive and perceptive and intuitively resonant. Okay, and they, last aspect, which again is not always the case with the high IQ people, is they tend to be preoccupied from an early age with otherworldly questions, metaphysical questions, questions of meaning, questions about existence. Okay, we've all come across like this super smart person who is like acing everything, and yet, despite all that and for all that, they are perfectly happy to just exist and lead a normal life, and they're not preoccupied with these issues. So probably not neurodivergent in this sense, even though they may have a higher IQ than the HIP person. But the HIP person is like a conglomeration of all these different traits. But the high IQ that is spiked and with an area of vulnerability is usually a condition as well. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is I was talking to psychologists who assesses these people. Often parents will think, oh, my kid has to be HIP because he has these difficulties at school, and yet he's very smart or she's very smart. They told us, this psychologist or this team told us that out of 10 children that are assessed, 0 turn out to be HIP. Out of 50, 2 or 3, or out of 100, 5 or 6, right? So for 100 children that are assessed, only 5 or 6 turn out to be HIP. So it's a lot more rare than people think. And just because you feel like you're a little bit different or you're a little bit special, in the positive sense of the word, does not mean that you're HIP. However, I think that there are sufficiently many traits that I've just listed that seem to be common among INFJs and INTJs. Analogical reasoning, getting to a conclusion in heterodox ways, not being able to sometimes retrace the reasoning in different steps, because maybe there were no steps like that led to the particular conclusion. Hypersensitivity, good memory, intuitive attunement, emotional perceptiveness, maybe areas of vulnerability as well, in terms of intellect. Like there seems to be, it's at times it does seem that this particular condition, neurological condition, has a lot in common with NI dominance. And it is possible that there is a bigger area of overlap here than with other neurological and neurodivergent profiles. Again, not necessarily, because not all INFJs have IQs of up to 130 and more. Not all INFJs are hypersensitive. Not all INFJs have tree-like, patterns of thinking with branching out in different directions. Not all INFJs have areas of vulnerability. So there is an overlap that is worth exploring in more detail when we know more also about the origins of HIP. But I just wanted to emphasize that is something worth exploring further, and may speak to INFJs who are in search of more explanations for possible neurological origins of the way they feel. Keeping in mind that if you're in the French-speaking world, it'd be easier for you to explore these issues, but you always have Google Translate, which can help you explore more about HIP. All you got to do is visit some French websites and then use Google Translate, and you get to hear more about that. So I hope that was helpful. I'm aware that I could have said more about this, but the HIP diagnosis is still relatively recent. I think 10, 15 years ago, psychiatrists, psychologists were barely beginning to make those diagnoses. They're becoming more common, and perhaps that will eventually spread over to the English speaking world. Okay. Now, just keep in mind that I've written books about the INFJ personality, HIP or not, INFJ life in the modern world, which is all about how to lead an authentic INFJ life as the key to a fruitful, purposeful and meaningful life in a world we often consider to be hostile. This book explores this in detail. I recommend you get a copy. The link is right below, as well as its prequel, The Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality, which is all about the INFJ mind, the deepest investigation of the INFJ mind, of the INFJ consciousness. What is it like to be an INFJ? What is it like to think like an INFJ? And as you can see, those books go wonderfully well together. If you want to get both, the links are below. Check the reviews, and maybe that will make you eager to get the books. And as usual, guys, don't forget that the absolute lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. I depend on your kind donations to continue producing videos. I could not do it without you. You're almost my only source of income as regards this work I'm doing here. In return, you get access to bonus videos, in-depth discussions of videos from YouTube and topics from my books every 2 weeks on Patreon, access to Discord, to the community, to myself, to great discussions. Consider it, and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.